And welcome to another recording of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We are back for more content, news, tech from the world of marketing. I say we because I am joined by my co-host, man on a mission to keep marketing simple. He is the voice of the Marketing and Finance Podcast and the host of the Roger Vlog video series. I give you Monsieur Roger Edwards.
Hello everybody, it's great to be back, and as always, my co-host is a man on a mission to demystify digital marketing. He's the host of the Content Marketing Studio video podcast. I give you Mr. Pascal Fintoni.
Well, thank you very much, Roger, for the introduction, and thank you to you, viewers and listeners, for your ongoing support. It is truly appreciated. This is episode 21. As always, we have lots to go through at quite some pace, so let's begin with In the News.
A survey from Havas Media Group has found that 45% of UK shoppers care less about Black Friday in 2020 than they did in previous years, in particular those aged between 35 and 44.
Well, Apple has agreed to pay $113 million to settle a claim alleging that the tech company deceived consumers by slowing down older iPhones to help extend battery life.
Warner Brothers have announced that they will stick to the December cinema release for Wonder Woman 1984, and the film will also be available online, starting with HBO Max.
Where the UK government recently approved the creation of a cybersecurity task force as part of a £16.5 billion package of funding for the UK National Security Services.
NordPass Cybersecurity has published their report on the 200 most used passwords in 2020, with 123456, password ABC123, and I love you in the top 20.
Well, the Facebook Messenger experience is finally rolling out to Instagram. It will include vanish mode, chat themes, and watch together for IGTV, Reels, movies, and TV shows to watch with your friends in real time.
The launch of the PS5 was delayed in the UK, but it did not stop celebrations, with the London Underground signs at Oxford Circus transformed into famous PlayStation icons.
And finally, Amazon UK has just completed their Black Friday Live, a 2-week event with online workshops and entertainment from the likes of Alicia Dixon and Stephen Mulhern.
Wow, lots happening this week, Pascal.
Quite, yes. Now, can I ask, I'll start with the first news you read out, Roger, about Black Friday. Unfortunately, you and I are no longer on the 35 to 44 bracket, but how do you feel about Black Friday this year compared to previous years?
Do you know, Pascal, maybe I'm an old git, but Black Friday's always been one of those things that I've thought it's just suddenly happened. You know, it's a very recent thing, and it almost creates hysteria, doesn't it? I was never ever able to understand why people were very happy to get up at 4 a.m. on Boxing Day, having endured a 3-month build up to Christmas. They have one day off on Christmas Day, and then they go back out to spend more money on Boxing Day. That always baffled me. But this Black Friday creates almost the same levels of hysteria amongst people. And last year, I just thought it was the biggest, cacophony of noise that I've ever heard around a sale. So I actually feel a little bit of relief this year that the pandemic has maybe just softened the effect of Black Friday a bit.
No, I would agree, and it just feels, and for me as well, the name is a little odd because it sounds very much that crisis. I think it was 1929 or 1939. When there was the crash of the market. I think it was a Black Monday or something like this. So I think it's just an odd term, really. And they've got Cyber Monday, which was essentially invented all those years ago. But of course, logistics has improved quite dramatically since then. So you don't have to anxiously order everything by that Cyber Monday or else. I think the way in which things are working out, and I'm sure they've learned through the pandemic, you could order something on Christmas Eve and get it within the next hour.
Yeah, and I guess you get to a certain age as well where, these big days where you're supposed to buy all sorts of presents, if you're buying stuff for each other and your family throughout the year, and let's face it, pandemic, because we've all been locked down so much, I suspect people have been buying stuff as and when they need it, and the need for a focused day, to me, this year doesn't seem to be as relevant as maybe it has been in the past.
what I thought was fascinating, and you're right, there's a convergence of themes and topics here. It's all about cybersecurity, data protection. It's come in the news, almost weekly for us. And I couldn't help but see the juxtaposition, which was an accident really, of you reading out this rather amusing report of the 200 most used passwords and the government spending billions of pounds in cybersecurity.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. It's obvious that people are going to use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as a password. I mean, it's dumb, obviously, but sometimes do you ever get that where you log on to a website or you log into an app that you've not logged into for a while and you just cannot remember what the password was, or you think you're typing it in right and it tells you it's not right, and you're going, it is right, it is right, it is right, and you end up having to change your password. It just drives you insane. So whilst people shouldn't do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I can sometimes understand why they do.
Yeah, but I wonder whether we're going to reach the point where I mean, what's been very sad about what's happening in the pandemic is the increase in fraud, online fraud. I know that many people are very worried about their elderly parents and people who essentially don't really always understand that what's online is not always honest, and the text you get from the bank allegedly and stuff like that. But I wonder if there's going to be a point where people will be essentially deemed to be negligent, and your bank, for example, will say to you, I'm sorry, but with a password like I love you, which was quite amusing, we're not going to help you out because you were negligent in protecting yourself.
I think you're absolutely right, Pascal. I can definitely see that. In fact, a lot of the times now, the banks ask you to double agree before you pay a bill, don't they? Are you sure that this bill is a legitimate bill? And you click yes, and then it says, are you absolutely sure it's a legitimate bill? And then click. So I think they're sort of building up to that sort of approach, aren't they?
Can I ask you very quickly, are you going to go ahead and get a PS5?
I'm not actually a PlayStation guy, Pascal, actually. I've never had one. So I've never had 1, 2, 3, 4. We've always been an Xbox family, a Microsoft family. So I'll just have to hope that there are some games on the Xbox that I can play. I did also want to mention about the Facebook Messenger rolling out more features, because by the time you listen to this episode of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast, we'll also have been 2 weeks into the launch of Twitter's new story feature, which is called Fleets. And again, Pascal, I know we said this a lot on the show, but it just seems to me that all these social media platforms are all striving to become exactly the same. And the things that used to set them apart no longer do, because literally they are all offering exactly the same experience with just a slight difference in, the market they're targeting. And I just seriously wish somebody like Twitter or Instagram would launch something genuinely different rather than exactly the same.
Makes you wonder whether eventually there would be one thing called Facebook and it'll just be one or the same. So what was called in the past Messenger, Instagram, or WhatsApp just is called Facebook. It's just it's a very, very, very strange, and good luck to them. But I think for me, I'm nonplussed by the announcement, because I use Instagram very, very differently to I use Messenger, which is also a very different in terms of how I use Facebook. But thanks very much, for your comments on that. But we cannot slow down today for this episode.
We've got to speed up.
We do. So let's move on to the content spotlights. And in this segment, Roger and I surprise each other with a discovery from the interweb, a podcast, an article, a video. So, Roger, what have you got for me this week?
Well, Pascal, initially this might not sound like a marketing topic, but it's something I did want to discuss. And there's hundreds of articles that have appeared in all sorts of publications over the last few days about this topic. So the one that I'm going to link to in the show notes is just one of many. It's more the topic that I want to talk about than the specific article, but this article is probably the nearest to a marketing angle that I could find. This is all about the Boeing 737 MAX. Now, for those of you who know, the Boeing 737 MAX is the latest version of an incredibly successful airliner that Boeing have been producing since 1967, and sadly there were a couple of catastrophic crashes back in 2018 and early in 2019, which meant that all the governments throughout the world grounded the Boeing 737 MAX, and this week, the FAA in America have finally lifted the ban on this aircraft, and it can now get back into the air. And just to give everybody a little bit of background about what it was that was happening with this, because it's a really interesting story, but a sad one as well. Now, the airliner is, I guess, a short-haul, medium-distance airliner, single aisle, usually 3x3 in terms of seating, and its main competitor in the world is the Airbus A320. Now, the Airbus A320 is a much more modern design than the Boeing 737 because that dates back to the mid-60s. When Airbus launched a new version of the A320 a few years back, they added bigger engines, much more efficient and quieter engines, and that was fine because the Airbus sits quite high up off the floor, off the ground. But the Boeing 737, because it's such an old design, is very low down on the ground, and they couldn't add the same massive engines on the plane in the same way as they did on the Airbus. So what Boeing did is they moved the engines higher up onto the wing. Now, what they had to do to compensate for this is that these new engines, the position they put them in, made the aeroplane slightly less aerodynamically sound than it used to be when the engines were lower down. And they included a bit of software which compensated for that change in aerodynamics. And it was that piece of software that malfunctioned and sadly caused these two crashes, which killed nearly 400 people. And over the last 18 months to nearly 2 years, Boeing have been trying to fix that software and introduce all sorts of new safeguards and double checks and triple checks and everything. And of course now the FAA have given it the go-ahead to go back flying. And the marketing angle to this, Pascal, is, would you want to go and fly in this aircraft? And this article, the one that I've chosen to put in the show notes, is from Inc. magazine, and the headline is, President Trump had a big idea for the Boeing 737 MAX, but it got rejected. And what President Trump had said a year or so ago is, when you get this thing back into the air, you'll have to change the name of it. Call it the Boeing 710-7 or the Boeing new plane or something like this. Now, Boeing have decided not to. They're sticking with the name 737 MAX. And this article's asking, is that actually the right thing to do, or should they have rebranded it? Now, personally, Pascal, I'm not convinced I'll ever fly on a 737 MAX. I mean, it's, from what I read, it was aerodynamically flawed, and they're just using computer software to cover that. Now, I'm not a flying expert, I'm not an aerodynamics expert, but that's the research that I did. At least I would give it a few years to make sure that it genuinely was safe. But I think the thrust of what this article is saying is that Boeing have decided that if they did rebrand it and call it something else, that would actually draw people's attention to it more. And it would almost be like you're calling it something else to hide the fact that it was this plane that had crashed. And they've decided to keep the name, which I actually think is a good idea. And what they're going to try to do is to create passenger confidence, maybe by doing flights with Boeing executives. Although, again, a Boeing executive probably would have to have courage to go on that flight, to try to build up very slowly the confidence that people might have to get back on this plane. And it might be the case that, airlines will have to say, if we've got a 737 MAX plane scheduled on your route, we won't penalise you if you decide you don't want to fly on that particular aircraft and you'd prefer to wait for a different flight, which is on an Airbus or a different version of the 737. So I thought it was quite interesting. You've got a massive brand, a global brand, that unfortunately had a couple of catastrophic crashes which claimed many, many lives. It's a damaged brand, massively damaged brand. What would you have done? Would you have changed the name, or would you have kept it the same?
I think, to your point about whether people will deem it to be essentially a way to mask reality and masking, obviously, a past that is just awful, in terms of costing lives. Because it's interesting, because many decades ago, and some of our listeners may be too young to remember that, but there was a ferry company who had an accident which cost lives as well. And they did change their names and became something else, and actually became a very successful ferry company. But you have to have been around at that time to remember when there was this obviously awful accident where essentially, if you remember, someone literally had forgotten to close the back door, and then water started to go into the ship. So I think with regard to their decision, I think it's because they are in line with the times. I think that would have been a good technique maybe in the 70s, 80s, 90s. But nowadays, in 2020 onwards, with the internet, with social media, I think they must be better off actually to try and repair, obviously, their brand. But, to your point, right now, if you were to search and Google, the aircraft itself, you're going to have pages upon pages of the news articles and everything else about, those incidents. And they're going to have to work very hard. And I think you're right. It's going to be a very slow progress. And if they are in agreement with themselves as an organization that this could be years, a campaign would take years, then I wish them good luck. As a consumer, I believe that organization earn trust by the way in which they operate, and of course about how well products and services function. And for me, right now, today, I think that this aircraft has proven to not be suitable for, essentially, the consumer market. And they're going to have to work very hard, for me as an individual, to be convinced that, it's not a risky proposition.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Pascal. Now, for us in the United Kingdom, and I think I'm right in saying for most people in Europe, there aren't that many airlines that have the 737 MAX. I think TUI have a few, and Ryanair have got some on order. But at the moment, it's predominantly American Airlines and Asian airlines that have the 737 MAX. So maybe we won't be put in a position yet where we have to personally make the decision as to whether to get on board. So, Pascal, what's your piece of content for this week?
So this week, something very different, in fact, which I nearly actually missed, but I've been on LinkedIn quite a bit over the last few weeks, and I was essentially shown, I think by the LinkedIn algorithm, a job advert for Redbull. I thought, well, I don't care. And I was just about to delete, obviously, the article and the message, which actually was sent via Shannon Vargas, who is the talent acquisition and senior recruiter at Redbull. And I was about to pass, because I don't know about you, but of late, LinkedIn's pushing lots of job advertising for me more than useful content. But then I thought, hang on a minute, Redbull, yeah. The leaders in content marketing, maybe I should pay attention. So I hope you don't mind, but what I thought would be interesting to discover what the position of brand marketing manager entails at Redbull, and whether we could learn some lessons. Now, as people can see watching the video, but also if you listen to the podcast, you can see that I printed the job advert, and surprisingly, perhaps, it's only one side of A4. And I'm sure someone like Roger Edward would welcome the simplicity of keeping things, tight. But I mentioned a moment ago, Roger, that in Redbull, as far as I'm concerned, are the exemplar when it comes to content marketing and content repurposing. So what I thought I did as well is there was a job advert on LinkedIn, which I'm going to discuss in a moment. There was a link to the main website. And it's been some years since I've been on the Redbull website. Oh my goodness, Roger, what a website this is for what is essentially a drinks company. And to begin with, I didn't know, but there are 8 options for Redbull. I only was aware of a couple, but there are 8 options of the drinks. Now, the company is known widely because of their kind of gives me wings adverts with that kind of very, very, stylized cartoon animation that you get on television. But they also have their own online TV channel called Redbull TV, where they are creating films and documentaries around essentially their sporting events as well as cultural events. Talking about events, Roger, I mean, they've claimed their space in online gaming and esports. Anything from skate to ski to snowboarding is theirs. Music. They also do free running, they have BMX bikes events and so on. They also do, of course, the aerial sports, including the infamous fluke tag, where people have to invent and build wings, really, made of cardboard and papier mâché, and then jump off a board into the swimming pool. They also, of course, do the soapbox race, where people build a cart made of essentially where they can find in a junkyard and try and race themselves. So they're part of that culture. They also have a magazine, the Redbull Bulletin, that you can buy, of course, you imagine, garments and accessories. They also, I didn't know this, provide a holiday experience called the Destination Redbull, working with partners around the world. The cartoons that you can see on television, you can go on the website, Roger, and actually you can download images and send them as e-cards to your contacts. And they also, of course, sponsor countless athletes out there. So quite a good company. Now, to reassure Red Bull and our viewers and listeners, I have no interest in applying to the position, even though it is for the headquarters in Nashville, Tennessee. So for the right person, that would be a lovely place to work in. So let me go through the job description. I'm not going to go into it in a lot of details, but again, it's very, very short. But when you look at the opening paragraph, Roger, the role of the brand marketing manager is about winning new customers, driving consumption with current customers, and reinforcing brand love, which is a version of brand loyalty. And even though they are Red Bull and they are, you could imagine, this kind of ultimate kind of organization, I kind of like the simplicity. Even for a brand marketing manager for Red Bull, it's that simple. You win new customers and you drive more consumption from current customers, which is at the heart of all form of business development. Would you agree?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a simple description, and yeah, you already said it. I like simple. I think again, what it highlights is one of those things that I often say is that this is entirely a communications role by all accounts. It's a brand marketing manager. Therefore, there's nothing. It doesn't sound like there's anything strategic there. So there's no product development. There's very little research, I would imagine, but it's very focused in its communications. But I think that it would be a very interesting job, purely for all those reasons that you've said. I love the content that Red Bull put together. There's an aircraft theme running through some of the things I'm saying today, but I'm sure that they sponsored some really fast, nippy sort of acrobat type aircraft. There's some sort of race where they fly through great big rings and things like that over a extended course. And of course the soapboxes are remarkably fun. So yeah, a very, very interesting brand. And yeah, isn't it good to see a job description that is on one page as opposed to 4 or 5 pages?
Which I've seen, no. I mean, even when you look at the 8 key duties and responsibilities, I'm going to read out, some, but I think they're very telling about both what we should take on board for our own organization, whether they're just one of you or a team. But the first duty, to be the eyes, ears, and voice of the consumer. And as someone like you, Roger, who's been really championing the need to understand your customers really well, and using that to leverage your understanding of regional insights, demographics, psychographics to influence marketing initiatives. So the marketing initiatives are influenced by your insight into the customer. Number 2, they want you to develop and refresh regional consumer profiles. Number 3, they want you to identify opportunities to enrich your understanding of consumer motivations. So these are the first 3 out of 5 key duties of the brand marketing manager, which again is a wonderful reminder of don't go rushing into, forgive me, as my wife would say, faff on Facebook. You need to, those insights, which I know sometimes doesn't feel like proper marketing, is going to give you what you need to really approach and execute in the right way.
I was having a conversation yesterday, funnily enough, with one of my old bosses, and I'm talking about a boss from like 20 odd years ago, and he was an absolute stickler for getting insights, and he was always on my back to get research and get insights. Even if you were doing a brochure or a one-page sort of sales aid or something like that, he would like insight and research on that item to make sure that it was going to work.
Now, so here you go, Roger. I hope you don't mind. It was a bit of an oddball, but a job description that helps us remind ourselves about, some of the key duties and focus. But ultimately, if your marketing is not informed by customer insight and it's not driving sales from new customers and increased sales from current customers, there's just something that has gone awry somewhere.
Excellent stuff.
All right. Well, on the subject of content marketing, we cannot slow down today, as I mentioned a moment ago. Let's move on to marketing tech and apps. And this is probably one of my favorite segments of Two Geeks and Marketing podcast, because every single week, Roger will surprise me with a tech and app that can make life easier as a content creator. So Roger, what have you got for us this week?
Okay, so Pascal, we know these days that phones are remarkably good cameras, and every generation of iPhone, every generation of Android phone that comes along, they always make a big deal as to the improvements they've made on the camera. So each iteration of the camera will have more megapixels, better lighting, a bigger sensor, more depth of field, different lenses, and it's pretty incredible what they can pack into a small unit like a phone. When you consider that a proper big DSLR camera would be 4, 5, maybe 10 times bigger than the actual phone itself. But the one thing that annoys me about the iPhone is that it won't take a photograph at 16 by 9 aspect ratio. And that's my favourite size of a photograph. And I believe it's something to do with the sensor size within the iPhone. But it's always confounded me because you can record video on an iPhone at 16 by 9, but the photographs come out at 4 by 3. Now, there's an app which I've found called ProCam, and you can definitely get it for the iPhone. I think you can get it for Android as well, but I don't know, not being an Android person, whether you have the same problem with aspect ratio on an Android phone. But this app, actually, I originally bought it because it will allow you to take photographs at 16 by 9. But once I downloaded it and put it on my phone, I realised that this app contains so many features. It's almost like introducing all the flexibility you would have from a DSLR camera. So the ability to focus, change the aperture, change the exposure, all of those things which the phone does automatically, you can then have control over within the app. So if you are a bit of a camera geek, but you don't want to heft your giant Canon camera around all day, this might be a really good thing for you because it gives you those knobs and bells and whistles to tweak within the iPhone app. So try it out. It's called ProCam, and we'll put the link in the description as always. Second thing, and I've just realised actually that both of my ideas this week of me just sort of building upon and finding a slightly better alternative to what you can get on the phone. Now, again, I'm going to plug my book because I'm still really happy about getting my book out there. And this week, somebody asked me a question, how did I actually write the book? And believe it or not, I probably didn't write it in the conventional sense. I talked it because I used the dictation facility on the iPhone to actually say the words into my phone, and the iPhone very conveniently just plugs all the words into whichever app you're using. So, for example, if you're in the Notes feature, you just click the little microphone icon and talk, and all the words appear in the Notes app. And it's remarkably accurate, and it understands my Northern English accent, and it even understands things like full stop, comma, open inverted commas. So you can literally dictate into the iPhone, and that's how I wrote the majority of my book. But of course, the iPhone isn't really designed to be a dictation facility. It's just a handy little gadget they've built in. So I did go looking around the internet to find dictation apps that I could use on the PC. Now, some of them you can buy, and they're actually, quite expensive, 40 quid, 50 quid, that sort of thing. And I've come across one which is called dictation.io, and it's actually a browser-based app, and it's very similar to what I've described on the phone. It's just got more features and a little bit more power. And literally, you just put it into your browser, Google Chrome, Firefox, whatever it is, pull your microphone out, press the the speak button and start talking. And as you speak, it just comes out all on the screen. And it understands punctuation, it understands line spacing and stuff like that. And it's such, I always say, Pascal, that if you're writing stuff, whether it's a book, whether it's an article, try to write like you talk, because that's the most engaging way of communicating. And if you can use a dictation app like this, then your writing will be so much more engaging and simple. So give it a try. Dictation.io.
Oh, thanks for that. And I think you're right. One has to discover the process of creation that works for them, and dictation was obviously right for you. Although before I share my kind of content app and marketing tech today, I just want, on behalf of Android user, just laugh at you about the inability to do 16:9 photography, because of course, as an Android phone user, we've been doing it for quite some time. But there we are. So recently, so for the last week or so, Roger, I've been delivering webinars a lot around content marketing and video marketing and so on. And very often during the Q&A section of the webinars, I'm asked about software I would recommend to edit video content. And I don't know about you, Roger, but I always get a little nervous by making those recommendations, because I always think that it's such a personal choice. So I always kind of give a range of options and say, but try them out and just use the one that you feel most comfortable, because by and large, they all do the same.
Yeah.
But my recommendation is always, don't be charmed by the offer of kind of advanced solutions used by professionals or, kind of keen content creators like you and I, because you'll find that the interface and the dashboard is going to be very confusing, or in fact, it will invite you to try things that would be a waste of time, is not required. So in an attempt to be useful, I've done more research, and I was reminded of two solutions, paid for solutions, but the monthly costs are very low, for really simple video creation. And my recommendation to viewers and listeners, and of course to people who come on the webinar, is know first what kind of video you need, and then reverse engineer the platform you need, as opposed to the reverse. So if you need something very simple for short social media video style, that 10, 20-second message, maybe a 1-minute video to introduce a new blog article, there's a platform called We Video, we as in us, W-E, and then video. And it's a lovely drag and drop. It's a lovely, very simple interface. It reminds me a bit of, the good old days of Movie Maker for Microsoft. And the good old days before iMovie actually became too complicated, where what you see is what you get, and you can drag and drop, you can cut, you can slice and dice, and create something very simple, add some text, overlay the music, and so on. But importantly, you work fast, which is, I think, very, very important. So if that's what you need in that kind of teaser content for a blog, or just teaser content for social media, I think We Video is great for you. If the job is different, which is you will look into more of a vlog like you would do, Roger, more of a Q&A, maybe more of a talking head tutorial of sort, then you want to be looking into something called Filmora. So film and then ORA, Filmora. They also have a mobile version of the platform. Filmora is done by a company called Wondershare. Some of you will know them because they have other solutions. But Filmora is great for that. A bit more advanced. You need a bit more kind of features. But again, you'll be working very fast because it's drag and drop for that kind of true video marketing content. So between those two platforms, with Video and Filmora, knowing exactly what you need, I think you might find something that will set you well on the way to becoming that award-winning film producer.
Sounds good, Pascal. Now, as you said, you and I, we're quite used to using the really powerful packages like Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro, but they are industrial strength editing platforms. Filmmakers use things like Adobe Premiere Pro, and if, as you say, you just want to keep it simple, these things are absolutely as powerful as you need to get something really quite interesting out there. So yeah, good to be reminded of the simple options.
Well, thanks very much, Roger. Right, let's keep the pace going, and let's move on to This Week in History.
In 1882, the Bijou Theatre opens in Boston and becomes the first theatre in the US to be lighted by electricity, installed and supervised by Thomas Edison himself.
In 1955, Rosa Parks is jailed for refusing to give up her seat on the public bus to a white man. This was followed by the successful Montgomery bus boycott organized by a young Baptist minister named Martin Luther King Jr.
In 1967, the Concorde prototype number 1 is rolled out in Toulouse, France, but it would be 2 more years of testing before the world's first supersonic airliner made its maiden flight.
In 1971, Michael Hart launches Project Gutenberg to digitize and make freely available public domain books and text. His first posting was the Declaration of Independence.
Wow. In 1972, Atari introduces Pong, the world's first commercially successful video game. This table tennis arcade game would spark the beginning of the video game industry we know today.
And in 1991, Apple releases version 1.0 of QuickTime, allowing anyone with a personal computer to play and watch color videos, and in doing so changed the history of computing.
In 1996, America Online launches unlimited dial-up internet access for $19.95 a month, and within weeks, daily usage doubled among subscribers to a whole 32 minutes a day.
Well, in 2003, Roger, The Return of the King, third and final film in the Lord of the Rings series, premieres in Wellington, and in 2014, Battle of the Five Armies, third and final film of the Hobbit series, premieres in London.
Wow, I wouldn't have said that Return of the King was that old. My goodness.
And that reminds me that was the thing back then, that was the end of year movie. That was the Christmas treat to go and see Return of the King and later on The Hobbit. And back to what you were saying about in the news about Wonder Woman, we're going to have to get excited about maybe watching something online.
Yeah, but that's good though, isn't it? Because we've been saying on Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast for a while that it's about time these film companies got their act together and said, during the pandemic, we're going to have to bite the bullet and maybe do a simultaneous cinema and platform launch. So hats off actually for them doing that with Wonder Woman.
Do you know, I can't get my head around the fact that we couldn't watch video in color before 1991, before QuickTime. I was just thinking, well, what did we do before? Was it like monochrome or something? Or
I don't know, but yeah, this is on computers only, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Kind of, how we forget that this is special, to be able to do what we're doing right now today.
Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to think back. My first computer was a Commodore. It was either a Commodore 64 or an Amiga or something like that. But I can't ever remember watching videos on those computers. So, yeah, what I love about this week in history is that even though you think you know something, quite often by looking into the past, you learn something new.
No, absolutely. And I thought it was important to add, because we do so, you and I, add historical events such as obviously Rosa Parks and what she stood for, literally, and how things have moved on. But again, it's back to this idea of, we are where we are, in terms of a society, where we are in terms of science and computing, because of things that happened decades ago. And I think this segment is always special to me.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, the Rosa Parks thing, last week on the show, you asked me about Doctor Who, and we talked about the very first episode of Doctor Who. Funnily enough, one of the most recent episodes of Doctor Who, in the modern era, with Jodie Whittaker playing the Doctor, they actually did an episode where they went back in time and they were actually on the bus with Rosa Parks, actually making sure that happened, because in a bit of a Back to the Future type plot twist, somebody was trying to change history by making sure that she did give up her seat, and by giving up her seat, that would have changed history forever. So the Doctor had to go back in time to make sure that history happened the way it was meant to.
I think it's also interesting that somehow, and we planned a lot, as people heard in episode 20, but we still leave things to chance. And you always end up reading stuff about aircraft and Concorde each time we do Two Geeks and Marketing podcast. So what is interesting is, for viewers and listeners, I was born in Toulouse in the south of France. And this city to this day is still immensely proud to have been a contributor to obviously the design and build of Concorde.
It's one of the biggest regrets of my life, Pascal, that I never got to travel even once in the Concorde. Do you know, in 2003, the last year that it was in service, there was an offer that British Airways were giving to take part in one of the last flights during, I think, the last couple of months. And at the time, it seemed like a massive amount of money. I think it was about £1,000 each. And the deal was you flew from London to New York in Concorde, couple of nights in a hotel, and then you flew back conventionally on a 747 or 777 or something like that. And at the time, I just thought, you know what? It's a lot of money. Best not. But now, in hindsight, the fact that it was never flew again after that and never will fly again, do you know, maybe it would have been money well spent just to have tried it.
So am I right in thinking, because you know more about those things than I do, that there are no supersonic aircraft in the world at this moment in time?
Apart from jet fighters, definitely not. I mean, you keep reading about people who are trying to develop new aircraft, but I guess it'll be interesting to see what the effect of COVID is, because I think the problem with supersonic jets has always been the fact they can't actually carry that many passengers. You know, Concorde was 100 people tops, I think, as opposed to like 500 people in a 747. So they were never commercially viable unless they were able to charge incredibly high prices, which is how Concorde managed to work. And I think that's the problem even now with developing these supersonic jets, is that they're not going to be able to carry that many passengers. But who knows, in the world that we're moving into post-COVID, maybe smaller aircraft and faster aircraft might be the way forward.
Yeah, and I know that, you know, there's been investment in some form of space travel. It's not quite space as we know it, and not in the likes of Star Trek and Star Wars, but, you know, moving into the higher level, altitude, is like into the atmosphere. Yeah. And I wonder whether this is where people are concentrating their efforts as opposed to supersonic aircraft. But and the Concorde essentially was discontinued because the aircraft was too old, or is it because there was low demand for its service?
I think obviously there was the very sad crash in Paris, but they fixed it. They lined the fuel tanks with Kevlar. I just think it just became too old to maintain. I think that to keep supplying the parts to keep it flying just became too expensive in the end for the actual commercial returns they were getting from it. And I think it was Airbus took the decision to say to British Airways and Air France, you know, we just can't support this aircraft any longer. You know, I still think it's an absolute tragedy, because seeing that plane, as I say, I never flew in it, but I've seen it fly quite a few times, seen it take off. It's visited Edinburgh for a few times. My wife and I once went on holiday to Barbados, and the hotel we were staying in was right on the final approach to the airport, and every day, about 3 o'clock, without fail, the Concorde came into to land, and it was an incredible aircraft to see in the air, and we're never going to see anything like that again.
I remember I saw it. I think it was in Paris. The roar of that aircraft was unique.
Yes.
There was nothing like it, wasn't there?
Absolutely, the sound of it was just power. It made the earth shake. I don't know. A lot of people don't like that, you know, with the pollution and all of that. But, you know, wow.
Well, talking of supersonic speed.
We are pace, going fast. We are going fast here.
Let's move on to our next segment, the creators' shoutouts. So, Roger, there are people out there creating immense value and content for their community. Who have you chosen today for the content creators' shoutouts?
Pascal, this week I want to give a big shout out to a friend of mine, Kien Tan. Now, I've known Kien for quite a few years. He's a consultant and he works for PricewaterhouseCoopers. That's one of those massive global consultancy companies. And he specialises in retail. And he's just put together quite a bit of content over the years about retail marketing and that sort of thing. But, and here's the thing, Kien is also a fitness instructor in his spare time, just like me. So we also share our love of fitness classes as well as our love of marketing. And again, there's this is a total coincidence, because there's been a big sort of aircraft theme running under this show today. But Kien is a massive aircraft geek as well as me. And back in, this is well over 10 years ago now, maybe 12 years ago, he was on one of the first flights of the Airbus A380, the double-decker plane, and that flight was with Singapore Airlines. Now, my son, Andrew, at the time, was quite small, and he was really into planes as well. And I met Kian very soon after he'd been on that flight at one of the fitness conventions that we used to go to, and he brought my son a load of Airbus A380 Singapore Airlines memorabilia that he'd collected off that flight, and my son was absolutely over the moon by that gift, and we've never really forgotten that. We still have it now. But that's not the point of the shout-out today. The shout-out today is that Kian's put together some interesting little videos on LinkedIn, just thinking about where we are with COVID and the effect that it's going to have on the lockdown and Christmas sales, and actually on what we were talking about earlier, Black Friday. And this video that I've linked to in the show notes is only short, it's about a minute, maybe 90 seconds, but there's some really interesting insights there and the promise of more insights to come. So if you're really interested in retail sales and what's going to happen globally over the next few months as a result of COVID and the lockdown, well worth checking out. Kien Tan.
No, and we can learn so much from B2C, if you like that term, and I think that there's some lessons that can apply directly into the B2B environment as well.
And who have you got in your spotlight this week?
So this week, Roger, I've got Gudrun Lauret in the spotlight, to use your terms. Now, Gudrun is a content strategist and content producer for many brands out there, but she also has a special program for heritage attractions and visitor attractions. And she's also essentially practicing, what she preaches in terms of she's also the producer of the Timepieces History podcast. This is also a very interesting formula. This is micro podcasting. What you'll find, Roger, is that the episodes are roughly between 5 to 10 minutes, and they just explore a historical landmark, an historical object, or indeed a celebrity from the past in a way in which she does it so well. It's very conversational. It's very kind of pleasant to listen to, but also because it's short, you can either binge on all the different episodes or just listen one a day. But it's also demonstrating to her client the heritage attractions, what is possible with a very, very simple setup. So if you want to listen to it, she will talk to you about the Farne Islands, for example, Roger. She'll talk about Durham Cathedral. She could also talk to you about Oliver Cromwell. The very first one she did for the Timepieces History podcast was the Bayeux Tapestry. So as a true Francophile, and also just maybe to be different, she started with that one, but she's also talking about the boogeyman, which I thought was interesting. So there's a lot in there. I mean, it's becoming quite a rich podcast, but I think there's a lesson in there in terms of maybe sometimes short is better and best for you, as a content marketing strategy. But also, I love the fact that, she has a service for a heritage attraction, and she's bringing that modern form of content marketing to the fore, but she's also leading by examples. So Gudrun Lauret is my shout out today.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've heard quite a few of these episodes, Pascal, and it's a lovely format. And, we really enjoy doing our history section on this show. I really like hearing about history from other people as well.
No, smashing. So thanks again also, Roger, for bringing your shout out for today. The time has come, as we've been saying, all along, to speed up to film marketing.
Yes. Pop quiz hotshot. There's a bomb on a bus. Once the bus goes 50 miles an hour or more, the bomb is armed. If it drops below 50, it blows up. What do you do? What do you do?
Well, what we're going to do, Roger, is talk about Speed, the 1994 surprise hit in Hollywood and around the world. Directed by Jan de Bont and starring Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock, and many, many stars such as Dennis Hopper, Jeff Daniels, and Joe Morton, which is one of my favorites, kind of supporting actor.
Yeah, and of course we've been making references to Speed all the way through this podcast, supersonic, 50 miles an hour and all of that sort of thing. And again, it's genuinely one of those films where, again, you're on the edge of your seat pretty much all the way through the film. I think once it gets started, and it gets started pretty quickly, within the first 5 minutes, you're right into the action. It never really stops for 1 minute to let you catch your breath. So it lives up to its name immediately with that whole speed idea.
And you know what is interesting is that it's a film that feels, looks, and sounds like the 90s. And it is to be watched, therefore, with that nostalgia in mind. You and I sometimes ask ourselves the question, how would it work with a younger audience? Because, of course, they've been used to something more current and modern. But I have to say, as part of this podcast, I was reminiscing about, Speed. I went to sit at the movies and I was blown away, by the storyline and the action. And I had the VHS cassette with me for years, and I watched it at least once or twice a year. It was kind of the guilty pleasure, but also it's just a good film, and the acting is excellent. The tension, and it's very believable as well. And I think that the filmmakers did a very good job.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I mean, it's simple premise. There's a bomb on this bus, and if the bus goes lower than 50 miles an hour, it's going to explode. And that's a simple concept to get your head round. But then on top of that, you've got to layer on the fact that it takes place in Los Angeles and all the traffic congestion that you have in Los Angeles. So the possibility of keeping a bus going above 50 miles an hour with all that traffic, that's what made it scary, because, oh my God, there's a traffic jam up ahead. We've got to dive off the freeway. And then they dive off the freeway and they find that there's a lorry in the way and they've got to scream round a corner. And it's just those, it's a simple idea, but they keep putting these hurdles in front of these poor people. And as I say, it almost becomes quite scary and quite tiring to watch it, because it's like one thing after another.
And people say that, of course, when you watch it with a 2020 kind of audience mindset, it can be quite lame as a storyline and action. But even when you look at the body count, I mean, this is a violent film, in terms of action. So the bad guy, Dennis Hopper, who plays the role of Howard Payne, you very kindly read his kind of line, and I think for years afterwards, people kept going on pop quiz hot shot around the office and,
yes.
and with their mates around the pub. But I think the villain is menacing. He's kind of obviously lost the plot completely. But also it was just that relationship between Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, who plays obviously Annie, and he plays which I think is a wonderful 90s hero's name, Jack Traven. I mean, if you call Jack Traven, you will do well in a film like Speed.
Absolutely. It's like Baz Ingram, isn't it? It's just a fabulous name. And, the pop quiz hotshot thing, I don't think this film is flawless. And actually, I'm always a big fan of setting things up in films and making things that happen early on in the film relevant to things that happen later. But I did think, at the very part of the first start of the film, the baddie Dennis Hopper actually puts a bomb in an elevator. That's the first introductory scene, and you've got Keanu Reeves and Jeff Daniels arriving in this tower block to try and get the people out of the elevator, and all of a sudden Jeff Daniels just suddenly goes into this pop quiz hotshot. You're in an airport and you've got a hostage. What do you do? What do you do? And Jack Traven says, "Oh, I would shoot the hostage." And I thought, oh, that's a very interesting conversation that they're having. Where did that come from? And literally, 10 minutes later, as Dennis Hopper's trying to get out the building, he manages to take Jeff Daniels hostage and he's backing away. And Keanu Reeves is there and Jeff Daniels just goes, shoot the hostage. And of course, that's how they get out of it. And I just thought, that setup just felt to me to be a little bit clunky. Maybe set it up and then the payoff is an hour and a half later at the end of the movie, but a setup and then a payoff within about 5 minutes did feel a little bit like bad scripting to me. But hey, the rest of the film's fantastic.
And, I remember when I went on the screenwriting course, I was told by the tutor, be horrible to your characters. And my God, that film has really gone through the same school or lesson, because you're right, once the character Jack Traven is on board of the bus, interestingly, the bus number 2025, which you add the numbers together makes 50, there's just relentless obstacles and kind of false attempts and whatever. And I think some people may not have seen the film, so we're not going to let the ending. We're not going to reveal the ending in this podcast. But I think what is interesting is that, and that some people will come on to in a moment, is that when you watch it for the first time, you just don't know how they're going to get out of this one. You kind of have a sense of course, they're going to win. It's going to get the girl at the end. They're going to kiss. But in terms of how they're going to do it, even when they have an attempt that and they have a solution that seems plausible, there's something that happens. There's like debris on the road that makes the bus veer a course. There's obviously red herrings and false information sent by Dennis Hopper's character, which means that the SWAT teams is going to wild goose chase and so on. And in the space of 2 hours, they packed so much. I mean, I think you're right. Apart from when they celebrate, obviously the fact that Jeff Daniels escaped alive, albeit being shot in the leg, and they are at the bar celebrating, and the character played by Joe Morton warns Keanu Reeves that this was luck. Be more careful next time. Everything else is just full on action and explosions.
Absolutely. And because this, again, coincidentally, this podcast episode has had a lot of references to aircraft and things like that. But don't forget that the very final part of the bus segment of the film actually takes place at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX. They solve the problem of traffic congestion by actually taking the bus and driving around the runways at LAX. They use the location phenomenally well with this film. And you're absolutely right, relentless from start to finish. So what marketing lessons are we learning from Speed?
I've been thinking about this a lot. To begin with, this was 1994. Remember, it was only 3 years after people could get QuickTime to watch color videos, we mentioned a moment ago. So I think the marketing was very traditional in terms of what they did. The 20th Century Fox, who were the producers and distributors, wanted to keep it safe and do the Die Hard type marketing, which I think wasn't very wise. I mean, many years had passed from Die Hard, but they just didn't know what to make of it. So in terms of marketing lessons for all of us and content creators, one thing that Speed does very well, and obviously we must credit Jan de Bont and his cinematographer, is the use of color. The movie Speed has a strong color identity, which is the use of blue and red. And if you're interested, all of you, go back and watch Speed. You're going to have a blast, but also look for the blues and the reds, which is why, oddly, the poster is out of step. Because the poster has reds and oranges to sell the explosion, but actually the identity and the branding of the movie are blue and red throughout. And I think that's a good lesson for all of us to begin with, Roger.
Yeah, and Pascal, I'm going to have to go back and watch this film again. Now, I have to admit that because we get so excited about the films that we talk about on this show, I pretty much always go and watch the film again after we've recorded this episode, unless it's a film which I haven't seen for a while and I have to watch it before. But mainly I'll just watch it again because we get so excited. But I've never noticed that colour thing before about this film, so I'll be definitely looking out for it next time. And I guess the second lesson is just getting the best team possible to work on it. Joss Whedon wrote the dialogue, the original screenplay by Graham Yost. He also wrote Broken Arrow, Band of Brothers.
That film. Yeah,
Broken Arrow is a good one. And John Wright, who's the editor, 13th Warrior, Apocalypto, and Mark Mancina. Sorry, I pronounced that badly, but Con Air, Bad Boys, Training Day, all, heavily action film orientated. So
and in fact, if you watch Speed again, now, having watched, the one you mentioned, like Bad Boys in particular and Con Air, you hear, it's a bit like John Williams and Hans Zimmer and all the others, there's a signature. And when you watch Speed, you hear the undertone of Bad Boys in the film, which is kind of, but you're right, it's about the team. So as a content creator, know your place, know your strength. Now, interestingly, Jan de Bont really started his career as a cinematographer. Indeed, he worked with John McTiernan on Die Hard, that was reviewed by you and I recently. He also worked on Black Rain. He worked on The Hunt for Red October. But when he took on the role of director, he didn't also do the cinematography. He got Andrzej Bartowiak to do that for him. And I think that's also an important, when you become the project manager, so to speak, or the content director, don't try and double up on or step back into your comfort zone. Let others do what you would normally do because you have different duties on this occasion.
Yeah. And what was remarkable, again, we've said, is the actual basis of the story was really quite simple, wasn't it? That it's a bus, and if it goes below 50 miles an hour, it'll blow up. And yet, despite the simplicity of the premise, they constantly threw all these obstacles at the cast. And in a way, it was almost like even though it's a movie, it could almost have been one of those very old 1930s cliffhanger serials, couldn't it? Because literally, like every 5 to 10 minutes, you get a cliffhanger or another obstacle or another problem to solve. And then once you think, oh, thank goodness we've solved that, then there's another cliffhanger. Now imagine chunking it up into a series of 15-minute episodes. You could just see it working like that.
Well, I think I never thought of that, but you're right. And I can't really imagine, what, when they sat down, as they always do, to do the first reading with the directors and producers, and you're the actors, and you turn on the page, and you don't know what's coming next, and you must have thought, this is incredible. And we know that Keanu Reeves was so excited, particularly once he saw the second revision, when Joss Whedon, as you mentioned, got involved. The dialogues were much improved, but he thought, I'm going to do as much of the action as possible, and I think that also pays off, because we see a lot of him do the action, and he got himself in real shape for that. And that was maybe why he led to him doing John Wick and all the others, because he just got hooked on doing the action scenes as well.
Yeah, now we don't normally do this, Pascal, in this section, but let's just talk very briefly about the sequel to Speed, which came out a few years later. It didn't have Keanu Reeves in it. I think Sandra Bullock was the only person who managed to come across. But it was Speed 2, and yet they managed to set it on a boat. Now, however fast a boat can be, you just cannot convey the same aggression and the same genuine speed as you can with a land-based vehicle. And I always remember, I actually think that's one of the few films that I've bailed on and not watched the ending, because it was just like the antithesis of Speed. What would that be? Sloth? It was just utterly dreadful, and they should never have even bothered to try and make it.
No, it was so disappointing. I think all of us, because we're inspired, encouraged by, how exciting the first one was, we went there. But I think by then we've learned, nowadays, 30 years later, we've learned that when the lead characters are not in the main story, it's not worth going. It's just the studios trying to, essentially jump on the bandwagon. It was very, very poor. Because to that point, Speed is the one that people talk about all the time. I mean, last year, of course, was the 25th anniversary of Speed, and the media around the world, obviously the Blu-ray box set was released and so on and so forth. I don't think Speed 2 will have the same treatment. I thought I would close this discussion on Speed, which could last much longer, as is always the case with film marketing, with a comment made by the Hollywood Reporter when the movie was released. So the journalist at the time had seen the movie, and it's something that I think is very, very telling. So he said, there should be traffic jams at the box office as Fox picks up many busloads of riders for its fast and furiously entertaining thriller Speed. Fast and furiously entertaining thriller Speed. Could we suggest that Speed in 1994 planted the seed for the Fast and Furious franchise, or are we stretching it a bit?
You never know. You never know. I actually think there might be some truth in what you're saying there. Somebody watched Speed and a whole new franchise was born out of that experience.
So, this is the end of episode 21 of Two Geeks and Marketing Podcast. Thank you so much for your support. Please leave comments, feedback, and suggestions in the usual places. Until the next one, make sure that your marketing is done right. I was Pascal Fintoni and he was Roger Edwards. This was Two Geeks and the Marketing Podcast. We've got to go.